Welcome to the Daily Devo. My name is Diana. Today we are talking about David and Abigail, and they were a couple that listened to each other. Abigail and David are a couple found in 1 Samuel chapter 25. Abigail, she was intelligent and beautiful, verse 3 tells us. David, he was the future king and leader of all of Israel. Well, David and Abigail are a couple who valued listening to each other's perspective and advice, even in important moments. You see, in chapter 25, we will see how the act of listening and valuing what the other has to say greatly impacts the events that will soon unfold. David and Abigail, they meet in a place called Carmel shortly after sheep shearing season. Say that, sheep shearing season, right? Well, David and his army men, they were in this area, yet they did not mistreat the people or steal from the area or hurt the sheep. They protected it while they were there. And conversation soon happens between David and one of those property owners in the area. And it doesn't go well. The details are then brought to Abigail. And one of the servants says this in verse 17. They say, "Disaster is hanging over our masters and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." They're talking about that property owner. Well, Abigail, she acts quickly. She gathers supplies and she heads towards David and his men. She approaches and she asks David to hear what she has to say. She says this, and I quote, she says, "Let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say." What a courageous act by a woman, right? Well, David pauses the execution of his current plan. He has swords in hands. His men are marching. They are on the go. He pauses his current plan and he chooses to actually listen to what Abigail has to say. That's another courageous act, isn't it? Well, David, he hears her wisdom and he changes his current action and his plan. He says this in 1 Samuel 25, verse 35. He says, "David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, 'Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request.'" So what can we learn from David and Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25? We can learn that valuing and truly listening to others is a valuable practice. In your relationships with a spouse, a significant other, a friend, or a parent, how are you doing at actively listening to the perspective and advice and words of others, even if it's unexpected? Would both of you say that you were heard and listened to, or would one person walk away and say they weren't heard and listened to? Remember, listening with value and attention, it does not mean you have to fully agree, but it does mean you listen fully to understand and consider what they say with the Lord. Today, is there one relationship that's coming to mind that you could be intentional to listen with value again today? Might you listen more fully to what they're sharing and hear their heart, or try to step into their shoes and see things from their perspective? Might you ask God for the wisdom to hear His wisdom in what they share? Let me say that again. Might you ask God for the wisdom to hear His wisdom in what they share? Try that, and we'll see you next week.